Let me give you my version of what inequality is about, all right? And yes, let me answer straight away the question that was posed in this seminar. Is Tharman's escalator a myth? My categorical answer is yes, all right? We have all seen that famous video clip of Tharman talking about the moving escalator. It reminds me of that video of Donald Trump coming down the escalator with his wife when he announced his candidacy for the American presidency. I think both are myths, all right? Now, when you talk about an escalator, the first thing you have to realize is on whose power are you moving? An escalator moves not by your own power. You are at the mercy of another's power, all right? And I think that is what equality has become in Singapore. Tharman talks a great game, and people love to listen to him. But if you examine his arguments more closely, they do not hold up. You know, the PAP, our government, is very fond, and they are aided in this by the mainstream media. They love to pick up examples of, oh, this poor student from a rental flat, has achieved this status. Great. But let's not forget, we are now not talking about moving one or two people up the ladder, all right? We are trying to move a whole social class, and that is what social mobility is about, isn't it? I mean, it's the aspiration of a lower class to move to a higher class in society. But has that been achieved over the last 40, 50 years? My answer is no. And why no? Sadly, because for the past 40 years, Singapore, like a lot of Western countries, got hooked onto this myth of globalization. We were told until very recently, we were told until about a year and a half ago, when you still heard Chan Chun Sing talk about the grandiosity of globalization, how Singapore cannot survive without globalization. Now all of a sudden, you know what? They have stopped talking about it. Why? Because as a famous fund manager said at the outbreak of the Ukraine war, globalization has ended, all right? And actually, this whole neoliberal order, and I tie up globalization very much with the neoliberal order, crashed in 2008 when we had the Lehman crisis. And after that in the West, what was experienced was a great era of stagnation, where wages did not increase, where the governments, like the British government, went on this austerity drive, where I would say, if you were not in the upper echelon of society, even the middle class suffered. And instead of moving upwards, people moved downwards. So I often quote Tharman's example of the escalator. But I always say, in the Singapore context, instead of moving up, you are moving up against a downward coming escalator, all right? And why is that? The reason is simple. And it is because of our fixation in the past 40 years with this concept known as globalization. It is our fixation with a concept known as the free market, all right? And let me say this. You know, the free market is actually a misnomer. I like to quote an eminent American economist by the name of Robert Reich, who was the labor secretary in the Clinton administration and who has written many great books. And he says, there is no free market where there are no regulations of government. In every free market, you have regulations of government in play. Let's talk about HDB, all right? If you buy a HDB, are you able to flip it instantly? No. You have the MOP, right? The minimum period of occupation of 5 years. So don't tell me that there is a free market, because there isn't. So I can't stand it when the government says, oh, we have to leave it to the free market to regulate. There is no such thing. Like, you look at the recent fiasco over the HDB prices. All of a sudden, the majority of Singaporeans feel that property is beyond that. It's not affordable. How did we, in less than a generation, move from a society where everyone expected to be a homeowner to a society now where our young people think that going ahead, they cannot afford property, they can only rent or share? Are you telling me that is social mobility? I don't think so. If you cannot even own your own home, I think you are so much the poorer than your parents were. And isn't social mobility meant to be that each successive generation is better off than their parents? So, you know, if I were an interested participant in an audience before the PAP ministers and they talk about equality now, like Lawrence Wong is trying to do in this Singapore conversation called Forward Singapore or whatever, which is totally bereft of details. My first question to him would be, how do you expect me to move up in class when I'm actually worse off than my parents' generation? All right? Now, all these things, mind, and you know, the standard PAP reply would be, oh, we can't help it. The free market regulates. That's nonsense. HDB, at the end of the day, is public housing. It is something well within the control of government. The government can easily control the price of HDB. It did not. And in the Goh Chok Tong era, because of this thing called asset enhancement, they allowed HDB to virtually become a casino. All right? People were making money out of it, as people today are. So I do not know whether not controlling the price is their solution to this dreaded problem of the decaying lease, where they first promised Singaporeans that HDB is an asset which will never go down in value, and then maybe this is a happy solution. Now HDB has gone way beyond the means of our young generation. So, ladies and gentlemen, my friends, I am saying this. When you have a capitalist society, like Singapore is, if government does not intervene and check, you are always going to have massive inequality. And Singapore today is one of the most unequal societies in the world. All right? And we may try and do good. We may try and introduce various programs. But if it is not on the government level, I am afraid those efforts are going to come to naught. Because you simply cannot move enough people up the social ladder. And I tell you, in Singapore, what are my grouses about the policies of this government, which I think promotes inequality? And you know, a few years ago, when Josephine Teo was the manpower minister, I believe, and when she was asked about inequality in Parliament, or was it in Parliament, it may have been in another forum, she said, well, but this shows that our system works. All right? Yes, inequality is the product of what I call a very capitalist and very neoliberal economic policy. Yeah. And I tell you one other main complaint I have, which I think promotes great inequality, and it is our government's obsession with foreigners, with foreign talent. Yeah. I have been accused on many occasions of being racist, of being xenophobic. I don't care. I really don't care. Because I think that our immigration policies of the last 25 years or 30 years have been a total disaster. All right? If you are old enough and you had been brought up in the Lee Kuan Yew era, you will remember what he used to tell us, that Singapore had no natural resources, that human capital was the only resource we had. And that was why every Singaporean parent took great pains to ensure that his children were educated to the best of their abilities. But today, even if you have a master's, even if you have a PhD, actually it's better if you don't have a PhD, because you really are pricing yourself out of the market, all right? Are you going to be sure that you're going to get that job? No. And why is that? And even now, when after all the problems of 2011, when it first surfaced as a major problem in the GE of that year, when people complained that the influx of foreigners was overwhelming, Tan See Leng, Lawrence Wong are still singing the praises of foreigners. And they say, oh, we cannot be left behind because other societies are looking for foreign talent. And obviously, they must be referring to countries like England and more recently Hong Kong. But I tell you what is the difference. Britain, after Brexit in 2016, experienced a great drain, workers' drain. And the British economy is very, very short of workers today. And Hong Kong, as you know, because of recent legal moves by the Chinese government, such as the security law and all that, have seen a drain of local talent. That is not what was happening in Singapore. The problem with us is that we opened the floodgates and the foreigners poured in by not only the hundreds of thousands, way in excess of 1 million. Let me give you a statistic and you will be shocked. In 1990, just about the time when Lee Kuan Yew was handing over to Goh Chok Tong, the percentage of foreigners, those not born in our country, that made up our population, as a percentage of our population, was 24%. In 2020, that percentage had risen to 43%. My friends, in 30 years, the relative change was 19%. And coupled with our low total fertility rate, if this trend continues, very soon, that locally born Singaporean is going to be in the minority. I don't care if people call me racist or xenophobic. I don't think that's right. I don't think it is right for a government which does very little to try and promote the growth of the local population, but keeps welcoming the foreign population. And what are the consequences? The consequence today is that because these foreigners come in and they are able to offer their labor for a much cheaper wage, we have descended into a low-wage country. All right? And I always say this, Singapore may look good on the outside with all the gleaming towers and the buildings, but we are not a first world nation when it comes to wages. Do you know that 35% of our working population are either unemployed or take home less than $2,400 a month? That is not a first-class nation by any measure, all right? And I'm telling you, we are now entering an era of high inflation, all right? I don't believe a word of what Lawrence Wong told us earlier in the year that inflation will moderate, all right? No. And I tell you why. The PAP parrots what the Federal Reserve tells them. And the Federal Reserve has been massively wrong on this. Powell has been caught on the wrong foot, all right? And now he's scrambling. And now all of a sudden he's trying to increase interest rates dramatically to try and control. But this decade is going to be a decade of high inflation. And Singaporean wages have not grown. And you are having a double whammy now, all right? You are going to have a class of people who cannot even afford basic necessities. That is why a food bank has said that, they calculate about 20% of the population need help from the food bank now. And these include even middle-class families. So, my friends, tell me, in this situation, how can we be saying that social mobility is improving? How can Tharman and the rest of the PAP say, oh, we are putting great efforts into things like childcare, early childhood education, that will enable your children to move up? So many Singapore families find it even difficult to afford childcare fees now. So I say this in conclusion. My 20 minutes is up, Jeanette. I say the current policies of this government are totally inimical to social mobility. It is not controlling the cost of living well, resulting in young Singaporeans, many of whom not even being able to afford a home. And it is this total fixation with foreign talent that has done our country serious harm. And I hope that in future, any new non-PAP government will reverse the approach. And my parting shot is this. If I am part of government one day, I'm telling you, the first thing I will do, I will abolish SECA. I will abolish all other treaties, all right? I will abolish any treaty that allows the free flow of foreign workers into our country. Do you know that there is another economic treaty known as the RCEP, the Regional Cooperation of Economic Partnership, that is now made up of, I think, about 13, 14 countries. Singapore is one of them. It was mooted at the start of the last century. And India was supposed to be a big participant, all right? Today, India is not. You know why? Because in all these treaties, so-called free trade treaties, I don't even consider them trade treaties, India insists on the freedom of the right of movement of its people. And Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and China, which are the major countries in this treaty, they refuse because they know if they open the floodgates like Singapore has, what are the consequences? So with that, I leave it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.